On May 25th, police officers in Minneapolis confronted a man by the name of George Floyd after a store owner called them, concerned that Floyd allegedly paid with a counterfeit $20 bill. After handcuffing the suspect and detaining him by a police cruiser, footage shows the police pinning the man to the ground while Officer Derek Chauvin has his knee pressed against the back of his neck. The man exclaims that he can't breathe and pleads for his life while onlookers attempt to reason with the officer. Several minutes later, Floyd is unresponsive, and he is pronounced dead when paramedics arrive. These events have led to riots across America, including the arson of Minneapolis PD 3rd Precinct. Some are cheering this on as a revolutionary insurrection, while others are lamenting the destruction and finger-wagging at the protesters. Many were livid that Derek Chauvin was not yet charged, and many are still upset that the former officer Derek Chauvin is only being charged with third-degree murder. Okay, I understand why they're charging him with third-degree murder. It's hard to prove intent even if it's blatantly obvious in this case. And if they can't prove intent in a first-degree murder case, he'll beat the charge. So they're going with a charge they know will stick. Even though any sane adult ought to know that choking a man out for 8 minutes is lethal, and both the victim and witnesses repeatedly informed the officer that he was strangling the man to death, which kind of denotes second-degree murder to me, it's understandable that his actions were the direct cause of Floyd's death, and therefore he has no defense against a voluntary manslaughter charge. But what really gets me, as of the time of filming this, is that none of the other officers have been charged yet. It's like they're totally scapegoating Chauvin because there were 2 other officers helping him crush the life out of Floyd, and one other guy who stood lookout. At very least, they are accomplices that abetted the crime, and since it wasn't an involuntary homicide, they should be held accountable. And I mean criminally, not just getting fired. That's part of why riots happen. It's not just that the cops murdered another person in an extrajudicial street execution in an almost beat-for-beat recreation of the Eric Garner killing. It's that they often get away with it. As far as I can tell, they had no intention of arresting Chauvin until after the riots started. They were just going to fire him. And much like the Catholic Church, the police just shuffle around these bad apples, and even in their own departments they sweep things under the rug. Chauvin had 18 previous complaints prior to this murder. Serious complaints too, by the sounds of it. He's not the only one either. Officer Thao, the lookout man in Floyd's death, was involved in an excessive force lawsuit in 2017, in which his behavior was characterized as cruel and unusual. How the fuck did these people still have jobs in the police force? If I had 18 complaints at my job, I'd be fired 6 times over, and my job isn't a matter of life and death. The blue wall of silence is just the police version of snitches get stitches, which is common gang mentality. Something has to be done to break up the fraternity of police and get them back to being public servants instead of quasi-military units. And the only way I can see that happening is if the public gets more oversight on their local police departments. Any job that bestows authority is going to attract power-hungry bad faith actors, and so they need to be held to the most rigid of standards. I had a former RCMP officer tell me that 99% of cops are good, and after calling him out for just making that number up in his head, I pointed out that any officer who is complacent with corruption in their own department is also a bad cop. There should be a no-tolerance policy for police transgressions, yet it ostensibly seems like a cop that breaks the law is more likely to get a paid vacation and transferred to a new department than to have to face any real consequence. And that's outrageous when people like George Floyd have to face the ultimate consequence. Sure, a riot isn't a particularly good thing. It's the human equivalent of a tornado. But unlike a twister, a riot is on us. We know the root cause of a riot are socioeconomic conditions which are within our control. If people are suffering and their plight is being ignored, they are bound to lash out. Granted, it would be both more ethical and more productive to focus that energy into targeting the actual assailants of your oppression, but that's a little too much rationality to expect from a human tornado. So it seems to me it's incumbent on us, all of us, to tackle the issues of oppression before they boil over into something like this. I understand that nobody wants to put effort into cleaning up other people's messes, but if you just stood there and watched as a pile of garbage built up until it collapsed and killed everyone, would you not share some responsibility? No, I'm not defending the rioters, as clearly theft and destruction of property are not good or ethical things, but an unjustifiable action can also be an understandable action. If a small child is being bullied, I understand when he ends up biting his assailants. Most of these businesses that are being ransacked have insurance and will recover. The people murdered by police have no option to recover. Now obviously, smashing up the front of CNN or looting an autoway isn't going to bring anyone back from the dead, but it's clearly sent a message to the people who needed to hear it. Normally I advocate for peaceful protests and an incrementalist approach because accelerationism tends to come with a body count. But complacency has its own body count. While we wait for incremental improvements, people are still getting killed. So I can see the argument for an immediate call to action, even if the action in this case is not particularly defendable. That's not to say anything will come of this either. Perhaps I'm a bit of a cynic, but I've seen this sort of outrage burn brightly before just to watch it fizzle out as the next news cycle hits. People are acting like this is insurrection to start the revolution, but that seems like some wishful thinking at this point. This is an act of frustration from people at their wits' end. As MLK once said, a riot is the language of the unheard. You can't marginalize people from society and expect them to continue to willingly participate as civil members of it. Make all the principled personal responsibility arguments you want, people who are outraged will not respond rationally. If they don't feel like they have an outlet, they will spread the misery until it can be no longer ignored by the populace. Besides, one of America's most famous historical tales is about how rioters pushed a bunch of tea into a harbor. But instead of acknowledging that this is a symptom of a problem we as a society could have addressed better at any fucking time, people on the right want to focus entirely on the bad behavior of the rioters. They don't want to ask why this is happening, they just want to harp on the fact that it is happening. That's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces. You'll never stop the cycle if you ignore the socio-economic and psychological processes that lead to it. They don't have the intellect or foresight to preemptively tackle the roots of a problem, so they just use punitive measures to try and deal with the outcomes, which is like constantly wiping up a drip instead of just fixing the leak. And while everyone is pointing at the rioters, I saw this footage from Atlanta that allegedly shows some sort of child soldiers in riot gear being used to defend a mall. Yes, the rioters are bad and should be stopped, but some of the tactics being employed against them right now ranges from bizarre to excessive.
These are cops right here destroying everything! You're gonna take the materials of us trying to peacefully protest? You are aggressive!
And the police are taking the
You are aggressive!
They even detained journalists to move them out of the area.
We walked away. I'm sorry?
You're under arrest.
Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Officer's with CNN and he's on the air right now.
Okay.
You are arresting him live on CNN. We told you before that we are with CNN.
That is an American television reporter, Omar Jimenez, being led away by police officers. He clearly identified himself as a reporter. He was respectfully explaining to the state police that our CNN team was there and moving away as they would request. And then for some reason, he was just taken in to police custody.
Even worse are the racists and bootlickers who have come out to defend Derek Chauvin and posthumously assassinate the character of George Floyd, as we'll see in these comments on a Washington Post article.
Was just reading Floyd's rap sheet. Pretty impressive. I bet Texas was glad to see him go.
Figures username Florida Guy would come up with that big brain take. This is common right-wing bullshit. When a black person is murdered by police, they dig up any minor transgressions to try and justify their death. First of all, I guarantee Florida Guy here has done unsavory things he doesn't want people to know about. And I doubt he'd be okay with getting strangled while helplessly restrained because he accidentally used a counterfeit bill. Secondly, I don't care if he was caught eating babies while kicking puppies and kittens. We have a system of law and order in which people go to trial and face a sentence for their crimes. We don't just let cops go around killing people on the spot like Judge Dredd. It doesn't matter what your rap sheet is. Everyone has a right to a fair and expedient trial. I can't believe these right-wingers are always talking about how they need to be armed to fight off tyrannical government, but then defend the idea of jackbooted thugs that strangle people to death on the street. They claim to love America, but then they hate the things that America ostensibly stands for, like equality and due process.
George Floyd seems like a low-life thief who resisted arrest for his crime. Good riddance.
Not only is this a callous disregard for human life, Keith here lives in a fantasy world. George didn't steal anything. He allegedly passed a counterfeit bill, which very well could have been accidental and happens to people all the time without them even knowing it. He was also sufficiently handcuffed and detained. He did not have the ability to effectively resist in any meaningful way, and there was no justification for several officers to pin him to the curb for 8 minutes. People like this enjoy their hate boners more than they enjoy being correct.
An ambulance arrived and brought Floyd to Hennepin County Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner conducted the autopsy, saying that asphyxia was not the cause of death. Floyd had underlying health issues, including hypertensive heart disease and coronary artery disease. Both diseases combined with being restrained by the police, plus any potential intoxicants, may have contributed to his death. The full ME's report is still pending.
That coroner report is suspicious as hell. The coroner even includes the term any potential intoxicants, which is a bizarre thing to include for somebody who isn't trying to poison the well. But the report does not absolve the police of the killing, it just claims that the underlying factors may have contributed. The actions of the police are still what resulted in his death. And the fact that anybody could potentially have underlying health conditions that may contribute to their death just means that the police shouldn't be so quick to accost people. You don't know who has a heart condition, so maybe tasing people and body slamming them and shit like that should be considered an act of negligence that would get you fired. It's so stupid to me that anyone would want to go out of their way to defend the officers in this scenario. And people try and tell me that this is an American problem, but here in Canada there have been over 460 questionable fatal encounters with police since the year 2000. Only 18 officers were charged and only 2 of them convicted. These people have all the authority and very little accountability, so what do we expect? I mean, think about it. If you killed somebody at work, would they be like, "Oh shit, you killed a guy! Well, I guess we'll have to put you on administrative leave. We might even have to let you go. Read over the severance package." Fuck no. You would be arrested and charged immediately. And think about the cop in Santa Fe that got caught having sex on his cruiser. Did he get charged? Nope. Not even with lewdness. Did he get fired? Nope. They decided he could keep his job. Not only that, he's been promoted to detective. What would happen to you if you got caught fucking on the job? Why do higher standards apply to you than the police? Until the police are held accountable evenly across the board, they will continue to be seen as a government-funded mafia that takes money in exchange for a protection racket that sometimes kills the people it protects. And when a wrongful death suit happens, the payments come from your tax money. It's no skin off their backs. And as long as you have a class of people with authority and no accountability, you'll end up with riots. You can't expect people to play by the rules of a crooked game. There's only so many times you could tell someone who's voicing concern to just deal with it. If you feel like you're trapped in a madman's house, you might just get the idea to burn the whole fucker down.
Leave him alone! No, what the fuck? Leave him alone! Go, get the fuck out of here! Get the fuck out of here! Back up! Get out of here! Go! Keep going! Keep moving!
She's walking away!
We got plenty of time here.
Are you okay? I'm getting shot! I'm getting... Katie, are you okay?
You can't fucking do that! Get the fuck on! Get the fuck off!
Don't touch me either!
Fuck you and do it again. What the fuck you gonna do about it?
I'm leaving!
He's not doing anything! He's in protest!
Get the fuck off! Go! Get the fuck off! Get out of here!